Hello, my name is Ronda Armitage, and I'm very pleased to be here sitting in front of you and talking about some of the books that I have done with my husband David and some books that I've done with other illustrators. Today I'm going to read you my latest book, or our latest book, but I'd like to tell you a little bit about the very first book that was written about these particular characters a long time ago. The very first book that David and I did was called The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. And this happened because we were way down at a place called Beachy Head, which is near where we live, standing high up on the cliffs, and there's a little lighthouse down at the bottom, and our son noticed a wire that was running down to the lighthouse, and he said to his father, "Dad," he said, "what's that wire for?" And David, who's inclined to joke a little bit, said, "Oh, I expect that's for the lighthouse keeper's lunch." And that's how this story began. Partly because I was listening for stories. I was trying to think of a story we could write about. So we wrote the story. It was the very first book about this family, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling and their cat Hamish. And it was written a long time ago. This book's been in print for about 43 years now, I think. So let's meet the Grinlings. There we are. Seagulls played quite a big part in this story. They're herring gulls, and there are lots of them down on our local beach. Seagulls are pretty good at looking after themselves. They're scavengers, so they'll pick up bits of lunch off the beach and old pieces of fish, all those sorts of things. So they've learned to live well. Anyway, there's the basket of food, and I'll explain how that happens. There's Mrs. Grilling's little house perched high on a cliff. There's the lighthouse. So he has to row out to the lighthouse, come rain or shine. Anyway, he's very lucky because he does like a fresh lunch. So Mrs. Grinling makes his lunch and she packs it up into a basket, puts it onto the wire, and that wire takes it across to the lighthouse. Oh, and it's a delicious lunch too. You can see there we've got lighthouse sandwiches, peach surprise, but even more important, perhaps, there are 3 scavenging seagulls, and they're hungry. So they dive down and they eat the lunch, steal it out of the basket, and chortle away to one another. These are talking seagulls. So that's how the story began, the very first story about the Grinlings. We've written other stories about the Grinlings. In fact, there are 10, and later I'm going to read the latest book about them, but just to show you another one that David and I have both done. David does the illustrations and I do the writing. This is one about the lighthouse keeper's cat, who gets very cross with the Grinlings because he thinks they're behaving badly to him. But sometimes I have other illustrators who do the pictures in my book. This one, called The Mighty Bitey Creature, the creature in this is a bush baby. You might like to find out a little bit about bush babies. And he's having a terrible time because he thinks he might be about to get eaten by some very strange creatures. However, he is saved by a lion, actually, but there we are. Today, I'd like to read you the latest of the Lighthouse Keeper books. This one is called The Lighthouse Keeper's Mystery. It opens with a lovely spread of beautiful clean water and a glorious fish. But unfortunately, the water doesn't stay like that all the time. So let's find out what's about to happen. Mr. and Mrs. Grinling lived with their cat Hamish in a little white cottage perched high on the cliffs. Mr. Grinling was a lighthouse keeper, and Mr. Grinling was a retired lighthouse keeper, and he still kept the lighthouse spick and span for the visitors who came to look around. So there he is. As it was holiday time, Mr. Grinling's great-nephew George had come to stay. Mrs. Grinling was bustling around the kitchen, Eat faster, you two. It's market day for Sally, so I'm in charge of the Sally's cafe, she said. George can help me at the Lighthouse, said Mr. Grinling. Eat up, George. Here we are. The first job is a clean-up, said Mr. Grinling. Could you please polish the light, George, in the lighthouse? Hamish can check for mice, and I'll pick up that rubbish on the rocks. Where does it all come from? He muttered. He filled the basket and sent it off down the wire. Seagulls, Yvette, Rita and Gus spotted the basket. So we've got 3 different seagulls now, and they're having a little chat because there's the basket, which used to carry Mr. Grinling's lunch, and here's another big net, and both are filled with rubbish, of course. Goody, goody lunch. Strange-looking lunch, Gus. And down here, oh, yuck, plastic stuff. We can't eat that, Rita. And as you can see, there's already bits falling in. And George calls out, not in the sea, shouted George. Great work, George, said Mr. Grinling. Now it's time to tackle the beach. Picking up rubbish on my first day, that's not fair, complained George. Everybody should take away their own rubbish, Uncle G. Oh, you're quite right, said Mr. Grinling. It's a mystery to me where it all comes from. I think some of this rubbish might be being dumped out at sea. So there they are, all sorts of things are being picked up, old towels, bottles, plastic cup. There's a rather cosy looking seal sitting there too. Obviously he hasn't been tangled up. But what about the creatures in the sea, Uncle G? Deep down in the water, all was not well. Lobster's claw was caught in a baked bean tin. Shark had chewed on an old lilo, and now it was caught in her sharp teeth. Baby seal couldn't catch any breakfast. He was tangled up in plastic fishing nets. And as for Octopus, with her 8 tentacles, look, she's gathering up all sorts of bits of rubbish and keeping them out of her house. Very early on Wednesday morning, Mr. Grinling noticed something strange out at sea. A large fishing boat. Very early on the Thursday morning, Mr. Grinling peered again. He's got a nice big telescope. On Friday morning, Mr. Grinling woke George. See that boat, George? This is the 3rd morning that's been out there by Tiny Island. I think it's dumping rubbish. We must catch them. It's probably pirates, said George. Trash pirates. I know a thing or two about pirates, Uncle G, so I'd better take my sword. The next day, as the sun was rising, Mr. Grinling, George and Hamish put out to sea. The kittiwake putted gently through the white-tipped waves. No dolphins? Asked George. Mr. Grinling shook his head. No dolphins, George, not for a long time. Once the sea is cleared of rubbish, they might return. I can hear something, Uncle G, said George, and you might be able to see just a bit of a boat there. Put, put, put. Put, put, put. Mr. Grinling nudged the kittiwake near the rocks. Ahoy there, shouted George, waving his sword. Sit down, George, you'll fall in, said Mr. Grinling sternly. Too late. The kittiwake hit a rock, but it was Mr. Grinling who fell. Splash, head over heels, into the sea. George didn't notice. It was Hamish who threw out a rope. George was too busy yelling. Trash pirates! It's Hamish, very kind to Mr. Grinling. Not trash pirates, we're fisherfolk, called a voice, and Captain Cod invited Mr. Grinling and George on board. I don't throw plastic rubbish in the sea, I fish it out. More plastic now than fish. George pulled a bag from the rubbish. "Uncle G, look at this poor turtle. It's stuck in this plastic bag." George lifted the turtle very carefully. It didn't move. "We'll take it back to show everyone at the beach," said Mr. Grinling. And you can see Captain Cod's already fished up quite a lot of rubbish, but I can't actually see any fish. Here they are back at the bay. George took the little turtle out of the bag and laid it gently in the water. "Gather round, my friends," said Mr. Grinling. "The creatures in the sea are often hurt by the rubbish that gets into the water. Some of that rubbish comes from our lovely beach." "Time for a beach clean-up," said Jason, the postman. There we are. I think this is probably Jason over here with his family. Mr. Grinling set up a very large recycling bin. Does that remind you of anything with that fin on top? He and Jason, the postman, painted it. Sally and Mrs. Grinling put up posters in the cafe. "Our beach, keep it clean." And there, of course, is Hamish, seeing off the seagulls again. He's taking charge, although I think the seagulls laugh a bit at Hamish, and she's one saying, "Oh, lovely day, Rita." They probably like flying away. At the end of the week, everyone had collected all the rubbish from the beach. Mr. Grinling was appointed the new beach warden, making sure the beach stays rubbish-free. And this is a nice photo of him saying, "Meet your new beach warden, Mr. Grinling." And I think it's been such hard work that George is having a little bit of a snack. "3 cheers," cried Mr. Grinling. "And now it's time for the clean beach barbecue." Well, that looks rather nice, doesn't it? Beautiful sand. While the grown-ups cooked, the children played with the clean, wet sand. Can we see any sand castles there? Not many. But already the seagulls have arrived, and the seagulls saying, "Oh, what a feast, Rita." And the seagull over here saying, "Oh, fill up, boys. Quick." And another one here saying, "Quick, that cat's napping." So there's Hamish, totally useless, fast asleep. I'm sure the seagulls will have a lovely time there. And everybody's playing, and some people are eating. And it says, "Welcome to the clean beach barbecue." It was a glorious barbecue, and a lovely sunset too. The children splashed in the waves, but not until every piece of rubbish had been put into the sea. No, no, no. Into the bins. Yes! And there we are. And George and Mr. Grinling, I think, are looking very pleased with themselves that they've done a good day's work. Well, that's the end of that story, and I hope after that you might remember even better than you remember now that putting rubbish into the sea, leaving rubbish anywhere is not a good idea. It gets very dirty. Rats and, if it's left on the ground, rats and seagulls and birds like that will come and get it. We need to keep our world nice and clean, but maybe particularly we need to keep the sea clean. Thank you for listening.